So let's talk more about probably his most famous run in the States, at least for the modern time, would be WCW, correct? In the late
89.
89. Would that be his best run in the States?
I mean, on a national basis, yes. Yeah, on a national basis, because he was the man with Ric Flair for whatever it was, 5 months, 6 months. From the first angle, which was the angle was May, and then the I Quit match was November. And so that was, yeah, he worked several pay-per-views on top and house shows every night with Ric Flair. And yeah, that, it's funny because it was the best business that WCW ever did until whatever it would be, like 95-ish or 96 when they started, once Hogan was in and, WCW really turned around. But from that period, from the start of WCW until then, the Flair Funk thing was the hottest program business-wise that they ever did. And I remember before the angle, and he was just like, it was like he's older. He was 45 or 44 actually, because he turned 45 during the, right after the angle was shot. Mm-hmm. But he was just like, it was almost like they don't understand it's going to draw money. He goes, I tell them it's going to draw money, but they don't understand, but it's going to draw money. You know what I mean? He just was like adamant that he got this one. It's like, I know this one, it's going to draw money. He knew how to, talk, Flair became his Dusty. So he knew how to talk with the banana nose and all of that stuff, all these interview ideas that he had. He just knew that this was going to work. And it did. And they had, it turned Flair babyface, real strong, and did great business. And, and had, like obviously that I Quit match is, one of the great I Quit matches of all time.
Well, yeah, you think about that period, it's Flair and Steamboat, and it's Flair and Funk. Yeah. Would kind of be the two, marquee matchups. And even Funk pile driving Rick on the table. I mean, that's kind of one of the first ones of table bumps that I can ever recall hearing of, at least. He's a pioneer when it came to that even.
Okay, so it had been done in Memphis with Savage and Ricky Morton, but that's Memphis, right? Nobody'd seen it. So when he did it, the pile driver was so feared. And so doing it on a table that didn't break, and even if it broke, it probably would have worked just as well. But, the idea was never, like in that, the mentality was never to break the table. It was to do it on the table. But yeah, it was like the first time I think on a national basis they did a pile driver on a table, and the idea was that Rick would be injured and his career would be in jeopardy, and he'd be out of action for a couple months to build for the first match, which was the Baltimore match, and have the doctor out there talking about the damage. And I mean, the funny part is Rick had neck injuries prior to this, so the doctor's out there, and when he's talking about the damage, it is all legit. But it wasn't from the pile driver, obviously. But, you had this doctor out there and just going through, how bad, Rick's neck was, and his Rick training for his big comeback, and Funk just being, just completely crazy on TV with the job guys and everything like that. And, it was, and I'm sure a lot of that was Funk's, mentality, because he was really on during that period. I mean, I wish the body could have held up better, because their feud would have gone longer if his body was able to hold up more. I mean, that was really the reason that it went the way it was, is, he just was doing so much and everything. But, I mean, again, his knees and back were shot from his back, probably mid 80s, and knees late 70s.
Wow.
Yeah. And worked, his last match was 2017.
It's so amazing to think that too, because you look at the style that those guys had, and obviously they're working hard, but the amount of crazy bumps and high flying and all that sort of stuff was 10% of what the guys do now.
I know.
It's amazing to me that he was hurt. Not amazing, but the fact he was hurt so badly so early on in his career in comparison to guys now, it's like, man, those guys were working at a different level just from a toughness standpoint, I assume.
Yeah, well, how it was back then. Like one of the things was like when you were hurt, you never took any days off.
Right.
And I mean, like, and especially like when he was world champion, he had to go everywhere, and there was, and again, like, world champion, you're legitimately doing a lot of 60-minute matches, maybe 2 a week,
Wow.
and so even though you're not doing as much crazy stuff and high flying stuff is now. And also the rings, I mean, the rings were much harder. They weren't, bump conducive rings in some places were, but most places weren't. So there was so much stuff. And he was, for his time, as far as big bumps, him and Harley Race were like really the two guys that were like ahead of the curve when it came to the big bumps. So he was doing those slams off the top ropes and things like that, before it became commonplace.
So let's talk about Terry's run as the NWA champion, because once again, for people that are kind of just listening that don't know, it was very, very hard to become NWA champion, to be nominated by the committee that was kind of behind the whole thing. And also, too, is this the only brother combination that were NWA champions?
I mean, when the NWA title meant anything, and I think even historically, they're the only two that were the only brothers, and that's what they were always, it was always promoted that way. And it was brilliant because you had two brothers who had such great reputations in wrestling, because Terry really made it as a national star. When Dory became world champion, Terry became a national star because it was perfect booking, because they would kind of bill it like Terry was the tougher of the two, but Dory was the better technical wrestler.
Technician, yeah, right.
So Terry's role would be to go and to your territory, whether it's Jack Briscoe or Johnny Weaver or Mr. Wrestling, whatever, these guys that were the top contender for Dory in the region, and Terry would go in there with the idea that Terry is going to maim this guy before Dory, so Dory would never have to wrestle him. And so Terry would do the real wild style, but that's where Terry became a big main eventer. And then when Terry was champion, even though, Dory was more the technical guy, the idea was Dory would go to all these cities, and the idea wasn't that he would maim the guys, but the idea is that Dory, who everyone he'd seen beat people for years and years and years, Dory was going to come and out wrestle this guy and beat your local favorite. So they were knocked out of the number one contendership position, and he's never going to get the shot at Terry. And of course, Dory's job was to put the guy over. So it was really, for the NWA, the Funk brothers both being such big stars, with either one as world champion, was great for storylines. I mean, and I think that may have been among the reasons Terry got it. I mean, not that he wasn't good enough, because he was. I mean, it was when Jack Briscoe wanted out, it was Terry Funk or Harley Race. That was the two choices, and Terry won the vote 4-3, with the proviso that when Terry wanted to give it up, it would go to Harley, and which is what happened. But Terry gave it up much quicker than he expected to, because he went through the divorce, and he loved Vicky so much, and it was just like he gave up the top spot in wrestling, because he had to win her back. He had to go home.